Hello, my name is Maya, and my topic is crack and powder cocaine. So, I will begin with the history of cocaine. Cocaine is derived from the leaves of the coca plant. Taken from the leaves of the coca plant, it is then made into a paste. Cocaine powder began to be treated with baking soda and then heated to remove the salt. This process yields small chunks or rocks that became known as crack cocaine with a relatively higher level of purity. Cocaine was first known as a miracle drug before there was a moral panic surrounding it in the late 1980s. Many viewed it as a miracle drug in the late 1800s, curing all sorts of ailments. Cocaine was once seen as a good drug. People taking it were not considered addicts, and it wasn't illegal to use. It was marketed as a helpful drug and not just for the brain but for the body. Cocaine continues to be a Schedule II drug despite the debate and concerns about the drug and its dependence. Crack versus powder cocaine. Crack cocaine is known primarily as used by black people, while powder cocaine is known as mainly used by white people. There still remains a disparity between the two forms of this drug despite their similar chemical and pharmacological structures. The psychotropic and physiological effects of all types of cocaine are the same. I decided to insert my poster assignment to show some facts that will be relatable for this video. So, the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine has led to a disproportionate incarceration of black people. People arrested for crack cocaine are given much harsher sentences than powder cocaine, and blacks and Hispanics tend to be the primary targets of drug arrest. Sentencing disparities. So, mandatory minimums needs to end and sentencing reform needs to begin. Punitive drug laws and punishments must end because it's not the answer to the problem. Mandatory minimums, punitive drug laws, and punishments are only doing the opposite of what they were intended to do. In 2021, an act was formed named the Eliminating a Quantifiably Unjust Application of the Law Act of 2021, or Equal Act of 2021. The bill overwhelmingly passed the U.S. House of Representatives in 2021, but it died on the Senate floor. The Equal Act passed substantially in the House with 361 in support and only 66 against. But unfortunately, the Senate isn't budging and trying to even consider the Equal Act. Although there are 11 co-sponsors for the Equal Act within the Senate. This act was passed by the House in 2021 and it's now 2023. The Senate still doesn't see how much change needs to be made in our so-called justice system. The Senate's failure to vote on this act sends a message to the entire world that they don't care about the racial disparity between crack and powder cocaine that has been going on for nearly 40 years. A person convicted of possessing 5 grams of powder cocaine will probably receive a probation sentence, while the maximum sentence for simple possession of any other drug, including powder cocaine, is 1 year in jail. We're creating problems by incarcerating people who have very low level involvement in this drug trade and then spending billions of dollars doing it. Arrest statistics. So, as the war on drugs and the moral panic over crack cocaine intensified, the arrest rate for whites went from 182 to 285 for drug possession and 44 to 99 for drug trafficking. For blacks, the rate increased from 341 to 1,087 for drug possession and 164 to 759 for drug trafficking. Blacks have been the primary target of the war on drugs. Then Hispanics are next in line of targets, while whites are the last to be targeted. There were different sentences put in place for crack cocaine because of the fear of a crack epidemic. This placed a huge target on both poor and minority communities. Acts passed by Congress. During President Nixon's term, he made drug use public enemy number 1, which was followed by the initiation of the war on drugs. The war on drugs was supposed to be a policing strategy to enforce harsher laws regarding illegal drugs, but cocaine in particular, crack cocaine, became the main drug with the worst penalties. Blacks are sentenced at much higher rates than whites. In September 1986, Congress enacted the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which established 5-year and mandatory 10-year sentences for a variety of drug offenses. This law included a 100-to-1 discrepancy in the amount of powder and crack cocaine necessary to trigger a particular mandatory minimum sentence. 5 grams of crack triggered an automatic 5-year sentence, while it took 500 grams of powder cocaine to merit the same sentence. This policy discriminates against African American drug users and sellers. Over 90% of the offenders sentenced for crack offenses in federal courts are African American. According to Belingo and Spohn, Edward Koch, the former mayor of New York City, suggested that any dealer caught with more than a kilogram of cocaine be given the death penalty, and the former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, proposed that anyone convicted of selling 3 vials of crack cocaine should get a life sentence. This is absolutely absurd to be coming from both the mayor and governor of New York. They were both 2 politicians of New York who the people were looking to lead and guide, but instead they wanted to add to the incarceration rate by insisting on life sentences and death penalties. In 2010, Congress passed the Fair Sentencing Act, FSA, which reduced the discrepancy between crack and powder cocaine offenses from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. The FSA eliminated the 5-year mandatory sentence for simple possession of crack cocaine. The Court of Appeals of the Sixth Circuit ruled that the provisions of the act must be applied retroactively, so that thousands of federal offenders sentenced for crack cocaine prior to 2010 can petition for shorter prison sentences. Some court cases that I found were these 3. The first is the United States versus Cleary, which was in 1994. The District Court Judge Clyde Cahill refused to impose a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years on Edward Cleary, who was an 18-year-old first-time offender who was convicted of possession with intent to deliver more than 67 grams of crack cocaine. Instead of the 10-year mandatory minimum sentence, the District Court Judge gave Cleary a 4-year sentence, which would have been his sentence if it was powder cocaine and he was a white guy. The second case is the United States versus Armstrong and others, which was in 1996. Following their indictment, the defendants filed a motion for discovery of information held by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of California regarding the race of people prosecuted by that office. They claim that the prosecutors of this office were intentionally targeting black offenders at a disproportionately high rate and prosecuting them. The last case is the United States versus James Maribel, which is in 2022. James Maribel was a leader of a multi-kilogram cocaine conspiracy, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Maribel had discussed, among other things, a seizure of 50 kilograms of cocaine as he arranged for the delivery of 20 kilograms of cocaine. Some recommendations. Instead of having drug users, abusers, and addicts being criminalized, they should be rehabilitated. There are drug offenders who have been incarcerated since the early aftermath of the war on drugs. Also, there are drug offenders who have been incarcerated years after the initiation of the war and the reduction in disparity. Several of these offenders should be released because they have served enough of their sentences, especially the ones who are still incarcerated for nonviolent offenses or if it was their first offense. Although the disparity of crack cocaine and powder cocaine has been reduced, this is not good enough. There is no reason why there still should be any kind of disparity between the two, even if it's minimal. Congress is now trying to reduce the discrepancies between sentencing for powder cocaine and crack cocaine, but the FSA is only one step into a multi-step process to making the laws both fair and just for everyone. In conclusion, as you can see, black people and other people of color have been facing both disparity and discrimination from the unjust system for decades, and it seems like it will never end. Congress and the administrators aren't doing much to make a change in this unjust system. Congress needs to take responsibility for being wrong and that they blew things out of proportion with the whole tough on crime and drugs and the sentencing disparity. Crack cocaine and powder cocaine aren't two different drugs, despite claims of the contrary. The only difference is in their physical appearance. They are scientifically the same drug with the same effects and therefore should be equally sentenced. It's now 37 years later, nearly 40 years, and there still is hardly any change in the law. Congress and policymakers need to work together to eradicate all disparities within the law between different races. Making the sentencing for crack cocaine and powder cocaine equal in all aspects is rightfully needed. And here are my sources, and the rest of my sources. Well, thank you guys for watching.